Hey Erin, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Great to see you. How's your day been so far?
Oh, it's going well. Yes. Early morning with the dogs, workout at the gym, and now I'm here and looking forward to this conversation.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, so let the viewers know who you are, what you do, and why you do it, Erin.
Sure. So my name is Erin Sawhill, and I am a licensed mental health therapist in the States. I've been practicing probably about 8 years now. I've done a whole spectrum of different clientele, addiction, court mandated work, casework, social, a little bit of social work, and then pivoted when I started working in private practice. I worked for several different people, and then I decided to open my own practice about 3 years ago. Been taking some time off to kind of recharge, but what I realized when I was practicing, um, that the theme that I kept seeing show up is at the core of like just being a human is we need relationships, and relationships were often still full of issues for for a multitude of reasons, which we can talk about. So then I started to decide that at the core of relationships, people would come in with, communication issues, sexual health issues. The list goes on. So then I went towards a sexual health specialty and got certified as a sex therapist, a certified sex therapist. And now I'm starting to add equine therapy into my practice. So I'm kind of, taking another direction, but also it's gonna come full circle, and hopefully it'll make sense to people. And maybe it doesn't right now, but working with people and then also bringing in the natural world with horses does kind of bridge this odd gap of people and relationship issues. And because I've seen some really powerful work happen in my own personal life with horses alongside being a therapist, I'm hoping to bring that to other people as well.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. I always say, relationships are at the core of the human experience. And
Yes.
looking at relationships, we've all had different struggles in previous relationships that we've been through and overcome. What would you say some of your previous struggles have been in previous relationships, and how did you navigate through them to get to where you are now?
Yeah, good question. There's several, because yes, I'm a therapist, but I'm also human, and no one's perfect. But I would say a few of mine have been perfectionism. So I've always struggled with how to be perfect. I got to be perfect, and I would self-sacrifice for the sake of myself to just make the other person happy, and not looking at my own stuff, whether that was um, past trauma, whether that was current issues in the relationship. I mean, I would just set everything aside so I could make that person happy, because I felt, what's the right word, that gave me more control, right? Or it not it falsely gave me more control. So I felt like I can't control them, so I can control my own stuff. So I'll set my stuff aside so then they can get what they want. But ultimately, I think anyone who's done some work on themselves would realize that's not how that works at all. That what you need to do is take care of yourself first, and then the right people stay, the right relationships blossom, and it trickles out from there. Another thing is not just the perfectionism, but caretaking. So I guess they kind of come alongside each other, but being too much of the emotional caretaker in a relationship. So once again, setting my own emotional needs aside and making sure that they are emotionally taken care of. So and how those two intertwine, what I've learned in my own work is if I'm perfect and I can present to them that I'm the perfect partner, then they won't have any issues. And then if they don't have any issues, then I don't have any issues to take care of. I mean, this is the story I told myself, right? It may not make
Yeah.
sense, but this is the story. We all have stories we tell ourselves that at some point in life makes sense. And then you do the deeper healing and you're like, that doesn't make
Exactly.
sense anymore.
Yeah.
And so this is mine, where let's be perfect so we don't have any issues. Because if you have any issues, then you'll need me. And if you need me, then that's going to be too much for me. So, that there's reasons where that comes from for me, and like it stems back to some early childhood stuff. But for me it was just this habit that became so dysfunctional of setting all of my needs, wants, and desires aside so I could make sure the other person's okay, so we can have this so-called perfect relationship. I mean, eventually it backfires, right? It always does. I mean, I finally found a partner, now my now husband, who really challenged me on that and would really question me. Okay, that's great that you want to help me, but what do you need? And I mean, sometimes I would just be kind of like the deer in the headlights, like, what do you mean? What do I need? I don't know. I don't know if I have needs. I mean, I know I do, but no one asks me that, right? So but then he did, right? So you met the right person when they're concerned about, you and your emotional well-being, and he was not okay with all the emotional needs just only being met on one side. Like he's not okay with that. And so, that woke me up a bit, needless to say. So, yeah.
Yeah, would you say it was like your husband that was responsible for you letting go of this need for making someone else perfect and neglecting your own needs? Or do you feel like he started you on a journey that you then were able to work on more? Or how did you navigate through that period of like, because old habits do die hard when you're used to
Yeah.
making people perfect all the time. Like, how was that period for you when he was kind of letting you know that, look, you don't need to be perfect? And how was that journey for you in that period?
Well, interestingly, a part of me, I remember feeling, as more time went on, I remember feeling a sense of relief that, oh God, thank God someone is here that can let me breathe and not be the caretaker 100%. And another part of me, that very like deeply wounded part that hung on to that dysfunction, also panicked because I thought, if I let go of this control, and oh my God, what is going to happen? Like, am I going to be okay? Is he going to be okay? And if he's not okay, then I'm not okay. I mean, this swirl of thoughts is anxiety thoughts,
Right.
all what if, what might be, it's all anxiety, future talk. But that it was this tug of war between, oh, relief, and oh no, if that goes away, then what does this mean for me in how I am in not just this relationship, but actually other relationships too. It helped me in other relationships with different family members, different friendships. It just kind of trickled out, because I was able to practice with him, someone who's safe, emotionally strong, to say, hey, like, it's not going to be perfect and that's okay. And I'm not going to leave you. Let's work out these bumps together. And then I've always, as long, I mean, I'm 32 now. Since I was 19, 20 years old, I've been in my own personal therapy. So alongside working on my own personal stuff with my own therapist, and then, I think what kind of happened was, it's funny how the more work you do on your old wounds, it does make way for new things to blossom. So I think the more baggage that I got out of the way, it led me to have my husband in my life. Because there probably would have been a point in time where I would have seen his behavior and ran, because it would have been too much, that my like old wounded parts would have not been able to accept the love that was coming from him. And so I think it was both, right? Like I did some work to make way for him, but then him coming in was a really tangible example of, see, this is what happens when you do the work and you move all those, like dysfunctional patterns out. And I tell him this all the time, how he was able to see through some of that. I mean, I would say that I could probably say the same for him, that I was able to see through some of his stuff as well. But it does have to go both ways. And it just makes you really thankful that when you do the hard work on the inner stuff that is intangible, that you can't see, but you know it's there, that the world around you does provide you in tangible ways. Um, and I'm a big believer in that, because that's what's happened in my personal life.
Excellent, excellent. And
Mhm.
speaking about like perfectionism, for people that are perfectionists, some people
Yeah.
like they've come out of like a relationship that maybe the relationship failed, but because like they were a perfectionist, there's a sense of like shame that they're carrying around because they basically failed at something that they didn't want to fail at. So
Hmm.
people that are going through this type of a thing, like as a therapist, how would you say they can navigate through that sense of shame that they had a failed relationship and move forward with their life and be able to interact and find a partner again going forward?
Yeah. So the way that I do therapy is I tend to go back a bit farther. So if someone comes into a session and says, "Hey, I just went through this relationship, there's a breakup, and they feel like they failed," that I would say that there's truth in the feelings that you have now, that you have failed. We want to attend to those, and maybe that's, we look at like, what does self-care look like for you? What is gentleness? and just curiosity. I love the word curiosity. My therapist uses it a lot as well. And meaning, is there any chance that you've at other points in your life felt like you have failed in other relationships? And is the failure of this relationship being compounded by previous ones? And so if those previous relationships have never been tended to, there's a good chance that that's why this one feels so big and so bad. And it could be things that are not so obvious. Like it might mean that, like, here's actually an example that on the surface might seem unrelated, but it could be, is that I've had clients in the past show up in therapy that never, like, that were adults but never really worked on some of their childhood stuff. So for example, not often, but I've seen it enough where I feel like I think this is a good example. An adult comes into therapy, they come from a home of divorce, and they really felt like as a kid that they failed their parents because they couldn't keep them together. Now, an adult who's in a healthy place would know that that's not logical, but a child in that space does not know that. Like children are very self-centered naturally and very like a little narcissistic, like in how they are, and
Yeah.
that's just because like that's how their body and brain are developing. It's nothing's wrong with them. It becomes a problem if they become adults and they're still thinking that way. But if you're a child and you're 10 years old, and you really feel like, oh my God, you for some reason feel like you are the reason for your parents' divorce, even though it might not be true. As a 10-year-old, you may feel like it is my fault.
Yeah.
I have failed. And you never tended to that 10-year-old at any other point in life. You get to your 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever, 50, it doesn't matter what point in life, that old hurt will resurface. It might not be so obvious, but what happens when we don't work through old relationship stuff is it kind of like sits in like an old suitcase in a closet. And so it's just like if you keep piling that, boxes and suitcases up in your back closet, eventually there's going to be a lot of stuff to go through and it's going to seem overwhelming. So what I usually do as a therapist is if someone comes in, we try to mitigate and kind of like tend to the emotions that are coming up now with the current relationship. But if there's someone that's willing to like stay in and do the deep work of like, hey, I don't want to feel such shame again. What do? We start looking back and threading through past relationships. Might not even be romantic, but just past relationships that you felt shame in, you felt guilt or whatever emotions come up. And that usually helps lessen the intensity that they're feeling more currently. Because they can see that, oh, it was my 10-year-old that's really driving some of this shame. As adult, I feel some, but the 10-year-old will always feel a lot more if it's
Yeah.
not taken care of. Yeah.
Yeah, it can be very surprising for some people how far back and how deep rooted some of their feelings and emotions are. And it takes
Yeah.
them to really show them that blind spot for them to really see where it's all coming from. Right. So, like, looking
Yes.
at some people that, like, for example, they've immersed themselves into their professional life, for example, and they're really like having success in their professional life, but it's to the detriment of their personal life because they spent so much time and focus on their professional life. They've now neglected their intimate side, and they don't know how to reconnect that and bridge the gap. In what ways can you say people can find that balance when they've neglected that side of them for so long? And they don't
Mhm.
really know how to move forward with reconnecting with the intimate side and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's very common because people get wrapped up in their day-to-day lives, especially if you're your parents, you have kids, you are both working full time. I mean, that's a common scenario that then the couple gets neglected. And one of my previous supervisors told me that, and this could be controversial for some people, but that you have to prioritize your if marriage or relationship, then the kids. And it's not because you don't care about the kids, but if you think about it like a hierarchy, that like if you're the couple that's kind of leading the family, and maybe you don't have kids, right? So I'm just talking about maybe like in a family scenario here, that the kids will see that, oh, my caregivers, my mom, my dad, my mom and her and the stepdad or dad and girlfriend prioritize and show the love towards each other, that kids see that. So I guess I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but to kind of come back full circle, in that if you could reframe it, there's kind of two things here. Reframing it as let me make space for that relationship because it overall helps everybody in the family system. It's kind of part of it that it doesn't just help you and your spouse and your significant other, but it helps lessen the intensity if you two are on the same page with, are you both getting your needs met, physically, emotionally, spiritually? What does that look like for you? But something more tangible that I often would like to tell people is you have to, I mean, whether you're an organized like type A person or not, like you both have to agree that putting things on the calendar and making time like that, like you both have to agree that we're gonna make time. So if one of you is like, well, I'm gonna put it on the calendar, and the other one's like, well, I just like to be spontaneous and just figure it out, that often doesn't work. And not because spontaneity is good or bad, and not because planning is good or bad, but that there's a misalignment in the intention and agenda for how we're going to get our needs met. So what I often tell people who are like, well, I don't want to plan anything because I like the spontaneity, and the person who's like, well, let's put it on the calendar. I can't be spontaneous because I don't have time for that. What I had an old or a previous supervisor tell me, which I thought was really good, was there's very, very few things in life that are spontaneous. So an analogy he used was even when you go on, maybe you go on a date with someone, like there is kind of an unspoken, not everyone. So I'm speaking for, a certain population here, right? That like there's often agendas of like, hey, we're gonna go out to dinner and then we're gonna go home and have sex. But what's on the calendar is not home and then, at 9 p.m. sex or time for intimacy. So it's just implied. So people are already like scheduling that in, but not like actually writing it in their calendar. And sometimes just making space for it, people feel like, okay, that takes away the romantic, piece. Um, but if it's not happening at all, isn't it better to put it on the calendar and plan for it? And then you can hopefully get back to more spontaneity than not having it at all, right? And so there's some wiggle room that people have to have. And if you have a couple, which most people are, you have one that's more type A and one that's not, you have to figure out what's one step that you can both take to be more in the middle. So someone who wants to be more spontaneous, I mean, maybe it's going to help you get more intimacy if you can agree to put something on the calendar like once every 2 weeks, once a month for a date night, right? And then maybe the person who's more type A, you decide, well, I'm not going to schedule every date night. I'm going to allow and give space to my other partner to schedule date night once a month, and he or she can tell me the week before. So and that may not work for everybody, right? Like it's a lot about communication and what works for both of you, talking it through, over talking, communicating, over communicating. I always like to tell people, doesn't hurt. It does not make things worse. Because even though you spend a lot of time with each other, or if you don't spend a lot of time with each other, but maybe you've been in a relationship for a long time, people like to assume that they know what the other person's going to say or do. But we have to remember, but they're still their own person. They're still their own body, brain, but their mind may or may not be thinking things that make sense to you. Even though you think you know them well, they may surprise you. You never know, right? So I always say small steps towards some middle ground. And what can you like maybe do slightly different, not huge steps? Because if we ask people to do huge things and do things too differently too soon,
Mm.
they they can't stay committed to it. So let's take turns once a month. You plan the date night this month, I'll plan the date night next month. Let's put things on the calendar every other week. Like there's has to be somewhere where there has to be some common ground. And if I knew more specifics of a situation, I'd have more questions, but those are kind of just generals, I would say.
Like, do you think there could be a best of both worlds in that type of a scenario? For example, like if they schedule like time, but like they leave that time open for spontaneity. Like for example, so it's like, okay, we don't know exactly what we're
Yes.
gonna do, but we're just gonna schedule this time, and whatever we
Yep.
spontaneously feel like doing in this time is what we can do. So like they kind of meet both parties, like that they both get what they want, spontaneity and schedule at the same time. What do you think about that?
Yes, and that is exactly something that would come up in therapy is we don't we we schedule a time to be spontaneous. So you get like one person's needs met and the other person, this more spontaneous person gets their needs met, right? So
Right.
that's a perfect example of we schedule the spontaneity. And I've actually suggested that for people is you schedule the time. It doesn't really matter what you do, right? I mean, maybe it does matter, but it's not. I think sometimes people get stuck in the weeds of, we got to schedule things or we have to be always spontaneous, and that it's really about like what's the goal here? What's the intention? What are you trying to accomplish with this time set aside? And sometimes it is just, spending time together at home on the couch, or sometimes it means going out to dinner or lunch or going on a walk. Like you get to pick. But yeah, that is definitely a situation that is a win-win.
Yeah,
And
sure.
some people have a hard time seeing that, but it is a win-win.
Yeah. Now, like, looking at human nature in general, like we go out all the time and we see different people that we're attracted to, right? So, like, in the context of human nature and the fact that we are attracted to different people all the time, what is your viewpoint on monogamy versus non-monogamy?
Yeah, it's a hot topic these days. And um, so I have seen people over the years that are non-monogamous and they have had boyfriends and girlfriends outside of their long-term marriage and have had long-term relationships outside of their marriage. So it's like they've been married 10 years and they've each had like a boyfriend or a girlfriend for, 5, 6, 10 years as well. I mean, it's particular people that can make it work. So, I think it's a spectrum. There are some people out there, very, very few, I think, that make it work really well. And they really, truly, in their core, feel like I cannot be monogamous. Monogamy is not for me. It does not make sense. And for them to be in a monogamous relationship would cause them more hurt and then maybe cause them to hurt other people. So for them to find other people who think similarly, I mean, amazing, good for you. I think it's hard to find people like that, that not only believe that, but then also can act in honest ways in open relationships. Some people I think because I've seen the other side of that would be I've seen, oh, let's just open our relationship because we're having marital problems and let's spice things up. That never works. If anything, that
Um,
always makes it worse, always backfires, causes more resentment, hurt, pain, and amplifies whatever problems were originally there. I think a lot more people are jealous, and I think open relationships are harder for people because they like um, that attachment to one person. But I think but also non-monogamy is in a spectrum. So some people are like, we are open, but only if both of us are there together with that experience of other people. Some people say, yeah, my husband, my wife gets to go on dates with other people. I'm not there. I don't want to hear about it, but I'm cool with it. And then there's some people that, which I think would be, more of the majority of people would say, no, I'm monogamous. But they fantasize about like being open. But if they actually acted on it, it really wouldn't work for them because they would that whatever feelings would come up would be too much for them to it wouldn't be worth the sacrifice of losing their partner. So some people might fantasize about it, but it might not actually work for them. And then that sometimes causes more problems for some people too, right? If one person acts on it, then we have infidelity. So I think it's complicated. There's a spectrum and it's not for everyone. I don't condone it like, oh, no one should do it or everyone should try it. I just think that people who want to do it need to be very, very careful. And if you're unsure how to do it, there's therapists out there who are willing to like walk through that process with you of like setting rules, boundaries, and ways to communicate differently. That maybe in a non-open relationship you would maybe need to communicate. So um, yeah,
yeah.
it's yeah, it's a hot topic, but yeah, it's a hard one because it's a little controversial, but that's my
Yeah.
thoughts.
Yeah, so like for people that are like in a healthy relationship, it's not that like they're lacking any intimacy within their relationship, but they're just interested in ethical non-monogamy, for example.
Yeah.
Like they're afraid to speak about it to their partner in case they're going to destroy their relationship or affect their relationship in a negative way. In what ways can they introduce this type of conversation to their partner without causing too much disruption?
Yeah. I've seen that before. So that's an issue that's come into the therapy room. And it is a tough one because if you have two people, one is interested in opening the relationship and the other one is not, there's always a chance that if the person is not on board with it, that they may fundamentally think of relationships differently than you, and it could mean that you two are not a right fit. That's like one maybe an extreme. Um, so some people who really feel like, no, I cannot be monogamous, like relationships end because of that, right? So I think if your partner that you're with is willing to understand why that piece of you needs to explore other people, then you probably found yourself like the right person that they're willing to support you through that. Um, but it takes, I would say, just a lot of talking and a lot of sharing of, why is this important to you? What does this mean for you? Even sharing, early memories of like being curious about it. I think the most important piece to know is that the person who's not interested in non-monogamy, it's not about you not being enough. The way I've heard it described to people who like non-monogamy is I've had clients in my room and they said, I've tried to explain this to other people who are who are sorry, who don't understand monogamy, and it's what the analogy they use. It's like my heart has more space for more people, and so some people will take that as, but I have a big heart too. I can love a lot of people and not want to sleep with them. Sure, but it's just a different way of looking at um, how you want to be in relationship, and people are so different in how they view the world and how they function that I think it's only fair to say that most people have different views of what relationships are and what they look like, that we can't all say where everyone's going to be monogamous and that's fine and healthy for everybody, or everyone needs to be open and no monogamy allowed. I don't think that works either. But I just, that's the one thing I would like to reiterate is the person who's not sure about monogamy, if you're dating someone or married to someone who is like, I really want to try being open, this is not about you being not enough of a person. This is not about you being less of a person. This is about the other person and their sexual, maybe desires, needs, romantic interests, and maybe how they fundamentally view the world. And that's not about you at all. So trying to separate it, it's hard, but that's what I try to get people to understand. And it doesn't always end well for people who can't agree to be open or not. If they can't agree on that, that's a hard one for most relationships.
Yeah, you
Hmm.
definitely got to find someone who's on the same page with you in everything. So
Yep.
looking at people that are monogamous now, they've both chosen monogamy, and this is what they both desire and want. So, but along the line, infidelity has happened. Somebody has stepped out of the relationship and has cheated on their partner, so to speak. But now their partner hasn't found out, but they're carrying around this sense of like guilt about what has happened, and they'd like to come
Hmm.
clean to their partner. But once again, they're like very worried about like, okay, if I do speak about it, it could destroy the relationship, or I could keep quiet about it and see if the sense of guilt goes away over time. In your perspective, if they were to come clean about it, what ways can they have that conversation, or do you think it's a viable option for them to not speak about it?
I don't encourage secret keeping for a few reasons. One being, so there's kind of two questions here. So I don't encourage secret keeping because I don't think it's fair to the person holding the secret, and I don't think it's fair to the person you're withholding. And most importantly, if you're the one holding the secret, you've cheated on your partner, and you're holding that, that I have found manifest in other ways in your life. Meaning, there's a consequence to not sharing that secret. So you might become more irritable with other things with your partner. You might become more irritable with other things in other people's lives that don't really seem related to you, but things will start to act out in your body if you hold secrets. And other parts of your life may seem more intense because you're trying so hard to like keep this jar tight over here that other parts seem to go a little haywire, where those parts would probably calm down if you can just release this one piece. I've seen that a lot, so that's my hesitation for keeping it a secret. Although there are a lot of people out there that choose to keep it a secret. Um, I couldn't do that, but um, I think that in terms of sharing that information with someone, if you are in a relationship where you are really nervous, anxious to get that information out, you can always go to a therapist and say, "Hey, there's some marital issues," and they basically act like a mediator to kind of help the dialogue go maybe a little bit more smoothly or calmly. I'm not saying it's going to prevent yelling or hard feelings, but just to have someone there to mitigate, that can always be an option. But the other hand is you don't know how someone's going to react. I think you have to have some insight into your partner, and that maybe you do it um, and have people kind of on standby. Like like, hey, I'm going to talk to my partner about this. I need you to be available on the phone in the next hour. Like you don't know how people are going to react. But most people who are on the receiving end of such news a lot of big feelings do come out. So, if you are gonna show to your partner that you've cheated, I think you have to also own up to, hey, I'm sharing with them in something that hurt them. Um, but you know, some people heal from infidelity and some do not. Esther Perel is a well-known therapist, and her take, and this is the first time I ever heard this, but her take on infidelity is usually infidelity wouldn't happen if there wasn't dysfunction on both sides. So people don't usually step outside of a relationship if all of their, or most, I shouldn't say all, because I don't think anyone's responsible for all of your needs being met. But if you step outside of a relationship, there's a really good chance that the person that was cheated on is also failing in some way in the relationship. And mind you, these aren't the words she has said exactly, but it's about like looking at the whole relationship, and that yes, there's one person that stepped outside the relationship and that could look at as like, oh, you did the worst because I'm also not acting well over here, but I didn't go cheat on you. Sure. But there's still some ownership on both sides as to why this relationship is failing. And the people who come through infidelity, hats off to you. It's amazing. But a lot of people don't. And I think that's okay too.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And for people that like they're in a brand new relationship, for example, like they like just met someone new and they're experiencing like butterflies. They're very excited about this new relationship and they want to immerse themselves into this new person that they're seeing. Like, but to the point that like upon immersing themselves, some people start to lose their sense of self, right? So
Yeah.
how can someone immerse themselves in a new relationship without necessarily losing their sense of self in the process?
Yeah, good question, because you see that happen quite a bit. And it's hard not to just jump in head first, right? Because that's part of that attraction that happens when you meet someone that you think on the surface checks all these boxes, right? You want to give all of yourself to them. Things to help you so you don't do that so fast is make sure that you have friends outside of your relationship and that you make time for those friends. If you don't have friends, I would say that's something to work on, is finding friends. Other hobbies are important as well. And having, whether it's you have a different career than your spouse or just things outside, it's just generally things outside your relationship are important. So some people may say, oh, but we live together and we eat dinner together every night. Amazing. If that's something that's part of your routine that you love to do, like Monday through Friday, like someone cooks and you guys are dinner table, family time, amazing, do that. But how about every once in a while, like one day of the week, I don't care which day of the week it is, one of you gets to go out with other friends and vice versa, right? Or maybe it's I need alone, I'm more introverted. So for me, it's like I tell my husband, please go hang out with your friends so I can be home alone and have my quiet time. And I like that. So I think the balance is making sure that not literally all of your needs are being met by your spouse. That's not just minimize how much they mean to you and how important they are, and when you're building in that new romantic relationship, you just want to be with them all the time. It's so fun, it's exciting. And to slow the brakes a little bit so you do have more longevity in that relationship means you can say, let's just for number's sake, 75% of my free time could be with that person, but you still need to keep that 25% to yourself, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that helps slow the brakes for some people. It might be hard, but knowing that this is a long-term game plan versus, because it's not sustainable to be with your significant other 24/7 all the time. It's just not sustainable. And you both need a break from each other, just to just even miss each other a little bit, like take the breather. It's okay.
Excellent. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Excellent. Well, Erin, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for everything that you've shared. Where could people find you, find out more about you, and find out more about what you do?
Yep. I will send this to you so you can make sure it's in some show notes or whatnot. But the two best ways right now are just email and Instagram. So I have an Instagram. You can find me at Wise and Well People. That's my business name. And then you can also email me at Erin@wiseandwellpeople.com. And those are the best two ways to reach me right now.
Excellent. And for the viewers, all of that information will be in the description so you can get in touch with Erin. Erin, once again, thank you so much for coming on. Any final words before we wrap up?
Oh no, I think that's it. I just appreciate you making the time to interview, and this was good. And yeah, if anyone has any questions or whatnot, feel free to reach out to me, and I look forward to hearing from anyone listening.
Excellent. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Definitely.